Hello, this is Kyle Chapman, and we're starting a new video series on the subject of designing user interfaces with Python. In this video, we're going to start learning about user interfaces, and eventually we'll get to learn about how we work with this within the context of Python. We're going to start by just talking about common features of user interfaces. So here's a look at Microsoft Word, just to give you something that is hopefully somewhat relatable. Along the top, we have a short list of little buttons right at the top, and this is called a button bar, or sometimes a menu button bar. And then there's this tabbed menu, which became popular in the early 2000s. And this type of tabbed menu is called a ribbon. It's got several buttons. There's text and icons all over the place, spaces where you're able to enter text even. There's a lot of user interface components here. Word is a big application, and this is a complex user interface. We aren't building Microsoft Word this semester, so let's go to something simpler. Here's Notepad. Notepad has one single large text entry area, and besides the title bar at the very top, it has a single menu bar full of defined functions. For a long time, this was really normal application design, which was very graphically minimalistic. And as I said earlier, this really changed a lot in the early 2000s. But there are still lots of mainstream applications that use this sort of menu interface, including a lot of integrated development environments, or IDEs. Visual Studio Code, for example, isn't way different from this. As another example of a common Windows application with a user interface, perhaps not as well known as Word or Notepad, but it still existed in every Windows instance you've ever owned, is the character map. Personally, I like to open this by typing its executable name in my Windows search bar, which is char map. This character map is used to view every possible character in every installed font. And the main reason I use it is to use properly accented characters and other special punctuation. One that we might end up using later, for example, is a normal keyboard symbol for a degree sign that we use for nicely displaying units of temperature. But the real reason I bring this up again is to look at the elements of the user interface, and this one especially because it uses several UI features that we could easily implement using Python or other programming languages. If you look near the bottom, for example, you'll see characters to copy. This is called a label, and this is static text that's used to communicate what something does to the user. Next to that, you'll see a large blank space. In many programming languages, and by the Windows standard, this is called a text box. This is a text field that the user can edit, usually freely. In the Python library we're going to be using this semester, it refers to this type of control as an entry, although this isn't completely standard. Myself and your professors might end up saying text box, or we might end up saying entry, but this is what we're referring to when we say either of those things. Finally, we've got some classic Windows buttons here. Buttons are typically used to perform an action. There are even some other features here, like a checkbox. A checkbox is used to indicate a single binary choice. This introduction to Windows user interface elements is meant to show you that there are commonalities in all of these basic, mostly business-oriented applications. And these commonalities allow the user to sit down with it, feel familiar more quickly, and the user can carry on relatively pain-free. There's always an opportunity to provide helpful information for the user to make things even easier, but we'll talk more about that later. In addition to the common controls or interface elements that I've mentioned on the left, there are also certain features that Windows users expect. And I keep saying Windows, but we are referring to user interfaces in general, and these aspects are completely expected on Mac systems and on Linux with user interface. Unless there's a reason why not, users expect a window to be sizable, movable, have interactive elements, usually ones that have a visual indication that they've been clicked or selected. And they expect to be able to use it with or without a mouse. And they want to be able to understand it. We also want uncomplicated fonts and designs. We'll talk more about some of these aspects in more detail soon, but I'm mentioning them here to provoke some thought. How would you feel using an application that you couldn't resize? How would you feel using an application with buttons that didn't show the click action taking place? These minor behaviors really help the user understand the application, and we really do need to think about the user. Nobody will pay us to make software that nobody wants to use. So in this video, we talked about common user interface features, and things you should know at this point is what kind of control would you use to display static text to a user? What kind of control would you use to allow the user to enter their own text? And why should we strongly consider following the conventions used by mainstream business applications? In the next video, we're going to talk about the tkinter package for Python and some widget properties.